Hi everyone, it's Rachel back with the Shades of Orange, and surprise, surprise, if you've paid attention to the title of this video, I'm going to be talking about thriller and horror books that I've read recently. As always, I have a good variety here, some hits, some misses, some books I really didn't like, so be warned that there is a rant in this video. But all that being said, let's get started. First, let's talk about Night Swim by Megan Goldin. This is a thriller that follows two different timelines, one being the present day where there is a podcaster that is going to a trial. She is having a new season of her podcast series, which is very similar to something like Serial. And so in her newest season, she is following a sexual assault case trial. And she is also contacted by a woman who wants her to investigate the death of her sister. And so that brings us to the other timeline, because we get to see flashbacks to this sister and find out what happened when her sister drowned. It was believed to be an accident, but her sister thinks that more was going on. This is technically a thriller, but I will say that for the most part, it's a thriller that doesn't have all of the markers of a typical thriller. Instead, it's much more about the topic of sexual assault. So if you're looking for a thriller that has twists and turns and things you're never going to see coming, this isn't it. Instead, it's much more of a slower burn and much more, in a lot of ways, a piece of general fiction. The author clearly had some messages that she wanted to bring across to her audience in terms of the misconceptions and myths around rape and their victims. And I think the author did a really good job of dispelling those and really pointing out the complexity of these cases and also the challenges of getting rape cases convicted. Personally, I found the modern day case to be the most interesting because I really find the idea of biasing the jury and different strategies to be incredibly interesting. The backstory involving the mystery of the sister's death was a little bit more lackluster for me. There really wasn't any surprise to it, and I just didn't find it to be as compelling. But again, I don't think that this book was purposely written to be one of those twists and turn thrillers that have become so popular. Instead, the author wrote this book with a clear intention in mind, and I think she did a really good job of doing what she set out to do. So I would recommend, if possible, listening to this book on audio because, as I mentioned, the main character is a podcaster, so you actually get to have little inserts of the podcast throughout the book, and the narrator of the audiobook did a fantastic job because it really did feel like I was listening to a podcast. So overall, definitely recommend this one. I read this book after reading a book that was very misogynistic and treated rape victims very poorly. So this book was definitely the book I needed to pick up at the time. And of course, there is some difficult subject matter in here, so content warnings for that, but it was handled well, so I don't find this book to be overly graphic. So definitely recommend this book if you're looking for something on that subject. Next up, we have The Resurrectionist by E.B. Hudspeth. This follows a medical doctor in, I believe, the 1800s who was doing medical experiments on his patients. He has lots of crazy ideas about the history of humanity, and he basically does terrible things like sewing wings onto the backs of his patients. And unsurprisingly, a lot of his patients end up dying of, these strange causes because he has terrible practices and is just doing horrible experiments. This book, while it definitely has elements of body horror, it's not overly graphic, but what it is a really unique story told in a really unique format. So this book honestly reads like nonfiction, and normally that's a negative, but in this case I found it to be fascinating. It really is framed as a book within a book with a foreword from the supposed author and so forth, and it has all of these great diagrams of these different humans, and the pictures in the book really enhance the story. Again, it does technically have elements of body horror, but the book itself never felt gruesome. I wouldn't call this book a gross out book. In a lot of ways, people have described this book as more dark fantasy. I definitely think it leans into horror, but it wasn't overly scary. If you watched my reading vlog back in October 2020, I accidentally read this book when I thought I was supposed to be reading a different book called The Resurrectionist. And I thought this was a really super scary book, and it wasn't, but it was still enjoyable enough that I did want to go back and finish it. And I would recommend it if you're interested in the topic, if you're looking for a horror book that's just really unique and you kind of like those meta horror books that are again are kind of a horror book within a horror book, then this is definitely one to check out. I thought it was just, yes, so different than anything else I've been reading recently, which is always something I'm looking for, something that will surprise me and just feels fresh. Next, I read The House on Abigail Lane by Kealan Patrick Burke. This is a novella about a house, specifically a haunted house, where people have been living over the years and are strangely disappearing. Now, if you followed my channel for any length of time, you probably know that haunted house stories are not my favorite. However, I continue to pick them up because I do want to be able to find ones that I will enjoy and be able to give you recommendation videos on the topic, because I know so many of you love haunted house stories. And I will say that this one did surprise me. I really like the setup of it. I am a fan of stories that involve disappearances of people as opposed to murders. I just find a disappearance to be very mysterious and unsettling. And for that reason, I did enjoy this one. Interestingly, like the last book I mentioned, this book also reads like nonfiction, and despite it reading a little bit dry, it really did work for the story because it felt like a factual account of a house that could have actually existed. And I do think that that added to the creepiness of the story, because I kept forgetting that this wasn't a true account that I was reading, but really a work of fiction. So very good job to Kealan Patrick Burke for giving me a haunted house story that I did enjoy. Not an all-time favorite, but a solid read for sure. And if you enjoy haunted house stories a lot more than I do, I definitely recommend picking this one up. I think you will enjoy it as well. Finally, for horror novels, I want to talk about Cell by Stephen King. Yes, I am continuing on reading through Stephen King's work. This one is an apocalyptic story where everyone with a cell phone gets some sort of signal that causes them to go crazy and possibly act a little bit like zombies. I absolutely was excited for this book because I love the premise. I really enjoy horror novels that involve technology, and I also really enjoy horror that blends in science fiction. So despite my mediocre record with going through Stephen King's books, I was very hopeful that this one would be a new favorite, and I'll say that I was really disappointed. A few things did not work for me. First off, the explanation behind the cell phones and how the apocalypse came about just did not make sense to me. I understand that horror books do not require us to always have an explanation, but if you're going to provide one, I feel like you have to provide a good one. And the science in this book was just so nonsensical. Again, I realize that this is horror and not a piece of hard science fiction, so I will give it a pass. But again, if you're gonna try to put in science fiction, just try better, because it just had me rolling my eyes. I really struggled to suspend my disbelief and go along with the science that Stephen King was feeding me. I thought it was pretty bad. And to be fair, apocalyptic fiction is never my favorite to begin with, so I really wasn't into the whole traveling and trying to find safety. It's just a trope and a story I've read too many times. But my biggest complaint was around the ending, which I thought was really bad. Yes, Stephen King is known for his bad endings, and this is one of them. It was so bad that when I finished this book, I ended up rereading the last few pages because I thought I had missed something. I thought I had misunderstood it, and I was completely right. It was as bad as I thought. It was exactly the ending I thought I had read, and I was hoping that I had misread it the first time around, and no, it was just bad. So personally, I cannot recommend this one. If you enjoyed it, I'm happy for you, but I ended up being really frustrated with this one, and yeah, I just had to rant about it a little bit on camera, so hope you don't mind. Now, last but not least, I did read a horror anthology, and that was Final Cuts by Ellen Datlow. I don't read a lot of short stories these days, but I did want to check out this one because I'm a big fan of Ellen Datlow's collection. She really brings together a lot of diverse voices. This one is all about horror books inspired by films, and so there were two stories that stood out for me. One was about two college girls that go and get drunk and then talk about physics on camera and then upload them to a site like YouTube. And of course, as a booktuber, that story really appealed to me because they had to deal with mean comments and spam and the challenges of filming and equipment and all of that. So I related to the story a lot. And of course, it is a horror story, so they start to see things on the camera footage that don't make sense. They start to get some weird comments that are just a little bit weird and off. And I really enjoyed it, so I would recommend that one. Again, it is one of those stories that ties in technology, which is something I'm always looking for in horror. The other story I enjoyed in the collection involved a movie theater where they have a matinee showing that is specifically for senior citizens, and I'll keep this one pretty brief in my synopsis and just say that things go horribly wrong, and I had a lot of fun with that one. That one was by Paul Cornell, and if you want to check out the description box, I always include links to Goodreads where you can read more about the books I mentioned, including the specific story titles if you want to check them out for yourself. So that is it for this video here. Thank you so much for watching. I would love for you to drop a comment down below letting me know one of your favorite horror or thriller books that you've read recently. If you're new to my channel, please consider subscribing. I do read a lot of horror, thrillers, science fiction, and fantasy myself. And if you're already subscribed, thank you so much. You can help me out by giving this video a thumbs up, hitting that notification bell, and sharing it around online. Otherwise, I will talk to you again soon. Okay, bye-bye.